Hey, welcome everybody to the second graduate booster of the fall 2022 term. I'm Marc Bragdon, head of the Harriet Irving Library Research Commons, who play host to the booster series. We have a few people in person, and it's also a hybrid session, as you know. For those of you who are away, there is a Q&A available in the Teams virtual meeting that you can use if you have questions during the sessions, and our moderator, James McKenzie, will be relaying that to presenters as we go. So we have 3 presentations in the booster series today. Booster as a metaphor is meant to be like rocket boosters that give you a little bit of momentum and set you on a trajectory to understanding some of the services, resources, strategies that you can employ to augment your research activities. And so we'll be talking about visualizing data with geography today, copyright for graduate students, and then academic podcasting. So kicking it off, Siobhan Hanratty, our data GIS librarian, head of reference and so many other things, will be talking about visualizing your data with geography.
Thank you very much, and welcome. I hope that what you will be taking away today is a sense of potential, and also that there are people here. If you have questions, please don't hesitate to come and find me and my colleagues. I will be going over a fair number of things. I always have way more content than I mean to. So I will try to be succinct, but I make no guarantees. And so ultimately what I want you to know, as Marc indicated, my name is Siobhan Hanratty. And I work, I'm usually in the Harriet Irving Library, but I can meet anywhere. And I want you to feel comfortable looking me up if you have a project that's of interest, and I'd be happy to meet and we can have a good conversation. So today we are, I'm speaking about visualizing your data with geography, as my title slide indicates. So we, generally speaking, I think most of us understand simply from the title that data visualization refers to the act of taking data and representing it visually or graphically in some way. So this, of course, can mean that there are varying degrees of complexity and sophistication and obfuscation and fun. I think even as children, we visualize our data to one degree or another. So as adults, we really have a capacity for much more complex thinking, but that can kind of get away from us as well. Sometimes projects, we start with projects that are really complex in our minds, and we think this is going to be perfect, and then you get into the nitty-gritty, and it's really exciting, but it's also quite a challenge. So usually it's just a matter of breaking things down into chunks. What I'm doing today is not really going into the processes so much as demonstrating some examples that you may or may not have thought of in the past. And this is such a small sampling that if at the end of my presentation you say, oh, that wasn't the kind of stuff I'm interested in, please don't think that's all that's available. I'm really just showing you a couple of examples or a few examples of ways to visualize your data. So we all know our old favorites. We've got the bar chart and the pie chart and the lines, the box and whisker plots, stem and leaf plot. Sometimes we visualize data which is not numeric. So brainstorm and word clouds, even an organizational chart is data visualization. So when we look at a table like this, I would ask you what strikes you about this table, and a lot of things can. A lot of people really do apprehend information or knowledge in a much better sense from tabular data. And so I would look at this table. I love a table. Oftentimes I prefer a table over a graph, in fact. And first thing I did when I looked at this was And actually, I was just using this data with a researcher the other day, and we were kind of looking at it. And so we were talking about how deaths. So this is, oh shoot, I didn't put the table, I'm sorry, I missed the table label at the top. This is components of population growth here in New Brunswick. And it's from Statistics Canada. So the big components, of course, birth, deaths, then there's international migration and interprovincial migration. So pretty stable. Our deaths and our births are like relatively stable from year to year. As you can see, our births are not quite as many as our deaths, which probably reinforces what you've heard anyway, which is that our population is aging, and we're now in a period where our older population is actually greater than our younger population. So that would make sense. But it doesn't look like there's a whole lot there. I mean, definitely if you look at interprovincial migration, you can see it was pretty stable, a little bit of fluctuation until 2020 and 2021, and then it skyrocketed. And I don't know if you've been in New Brunswick for the last 2 or 3 years, but certainly once COVID hit, a lot of places that, certainly the Maritimes enjoyed a population boom. Let's put it that way. So that number sort of attests to that. And then we've got our total growth information there too. So, there are a couple things jump out. But when you look at it graphically, what I really noticed, and this is an example of where I really, I finally kind of said, oh yeah, I guess graphs aren't so bad. First of all, as you can tell, so let's pretend like 2021, 21, or 21, 22 is not really there at this point. But if you look at this data visually, from 2016 to 2021, just taking a look from year to year, in the tabular data, I was just kind of looking across and looking for variations. But as I look at it from discrete year to discrete year, I really see how big the impact of, for instance, our deaths are. But once we get down to the last 2 years, you really see where that jump in not just interprovincial migration, although you can really see that, but also international migration. So, I mean, I am perfectly capable of reading a table, and as I said, I much prefer a table, but if I were making a presentation, I would probably want to use this particular type of visualization. It's a very basic visualization. It's not a fancy dashboard, which we can get into. But this really does speak to people very quickly, right? So you can do those same things with geography.
Excuse me?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, in the death, okay?
Mm-hmm.
What we can see that in 2017 there is not COVID.
Right.
And 2019 to 2021, since we've got COVID, and we had a lot of maybe people death. So I don't know. We cannot see it. There is something that.
That's right. It doesn't really kind of jump out.
COVID did not affect here.
One would have thought that maybe the deaths would have jumped up, and certainly by 2022 they have. But New Brunswick wasn't we have, relatively speaking, we have not had that many deaths due to COVID. I mean, proportionally speaking, within our population, we have had a higher than expected, I would say, number of deaths or number of cases. But that's right, the deaths don't jump out the way that the interprovincial migration, for instance, or the international migration does. But you're absolutely right. You would have expected to see something. And you can see a teeny little bit between 2021 and 2022. So there are a couple of things there, one of which is that the data is collected from July 1st to June 30th. So 2019 to 2020 is actually July 1st, 2019 to June 30th, 2020. So just the first 3 months of the pandemic. And then you can see from 2020/21 to 2021/22 that you're getting that effect a little bit more.
Thank you.
But your actual question, which is what's going on, we would want to dig into the deaths and the footnotes, the tabular data and the footnotes.
Thank you.
Welcome. So, here at UMB Libraries, we have a map collection. We do have access to GIS software through, certainly through open source software. QGIS is certainly one of the biggest ones. So this is an open source software, freely available within the labs, at least at UMB Fredericton. It would be probably available at UMVA St. John as well, but certainly in the lab environment in Fredericton, QGIS is already, it's either rolled out, here in the library for instance, we asked them to roll it out already. But if you don't see it available on a computer when you log in, it's within, you'd be able to run it through the UMB Software Center. Now the other thing that the other license, or the licensed software that we also have is the Esri software, the ArcGIS Desktop and Pro, which is extremely expensive. So this is the time to start getting up to speed on how to use this kind of industry-leading software. Don't get me wrong, I love open source software and I would never discourage anyone. In fact, I would encourage you to sort of look at both options. But if you want to be able to, after you leave UNB, if you want to be able to say, I've got experience in this software that every industry uses, this is the time to do it because we have site licenses. You can run it in labs. You can, as long as you don't have a Mac, you can download it on your laptop or your desktop and run it. There are other ways to do it as well. If you need a virtual machine, you can. If you have access, you can run it on a Mac, but it is Windows software. We also have online and courses that you can take at your own pace, some of which are free and some of which normally would cost you. However, again, because of our site license, you can take these courses for free for you. We also, I just wanted to make the point that I very much encourage you to reach out to me if you ever would like to start exploring, either in data visualization, sort of on the more numeric, traditional front, or geospatial. My office is just down the hall. I think my email address is on the booster information. And I'm all over the government documents, data, and web pages as well. So, really what we're doing with our geographic visualization is taking that same data that is associated with place and representing it geographically. So this allows for exploration, data interpretation, and modeling. So there are lots of things that you can do when you are working with geospatial data. It can be as straightforward as, I just need a topographic map because I'm doing X, Y, or Z. So can you help me get that data? Or it can be, this is the data I have collected. Now I know that there is location associated and I would like to be able to map it. So this is just the, basically the example portion. So we have different types of, and I really am focusing on maps as opposed to other types of tools at this point. So we've got a choropleth map where you can see that the data is visualized using color. Sometimes it's intensity, sometimes it's pattern. It always follows certain boundaries, and you can see variation. So this is a very recent map. This is from the census, the 2021 census, Fredericton Census Metropolitan Area. And what we're looking at there is the percentage of population below the after-tax low-income measures. So the darker the area, the higher the percentage of people who live under the low income, or who are considered to be basically in that lower income. And then, because StatCan knows what they're doing, they always will always cite their information, or they'll always give you the appropriate information up to and including what the low income measure is. We also have dot density maps. I think we've all seen maps like this in the past. Certainly that's, the world at night, you get those beautiful maps. Well, this is actually another population map. So the U.S. takes their census every 10 years, and this is their most recent population distribution. And as you can see from a dot density map, so the dot depicts a certain number, and that's a stable number. Or a static number, I should say. So you can see, again, it demonstrates the differences in geographic distribution, certainly reveals patterns, but it's not great for trying to get accurate values or to demonstrate or display accurate values. Nor would anyone presume that it would be, of course. Another type of dot map is called a graduated symbol map. So this data is, these points represent domestic disputes reported to the Fredericton City Police. And so this is a graduated symbol. So as you can see, the size of the symbol depends on the value itself. A heat map. Sometimes choropleth maps get called heat maps, and they're not really. The big distinction here is that a heat map, generally speaking, although it does use color and intensity to depict value and information, the heat maps don't follow traditional boundaries. They display the magnitude of the phenomenon, but they're arbitrary boundaries. I mean, they're not really arbitrary. The GIS software has calculated it, but
they are less accurate, maybe? No?
No, they're not necessarily less accurate. It's just that it's, I think it really depends on the amount of data that has gone in, and you have certain variables that you can control when you are taking your data and then saying, okay, it's not quite as easy as, I'd like heat map, please. Thank you. I mean, technically, there are actually buttons that you press, but there are actually research decisions that you have to make as well. Okay. This is a fun map, and I always love to include it. So this is effectively a choropleth map, so we're using color to show variations, but it's actually bivariate because it's talking about the consumption. I think it's the amount of money that is spent on beer versus wine in the U.S. So the John Nelson, who created this map, he, instead of using two maps, one that shows the expenditure of beer in the U.S., and I would say that's by county probably, and one that shows the expenditure of wine in the U.S., he has instead chosen to show them together with effectively a scale. So dark orange or beer color means that there's more money spent on beer in these areas, whereas the dark purple or wine color indicates that more money is being spent on wine. And then that sort of middle ground is certainly meant to be getting closer and closer to an equal amount. So you can have fun with maps too. I've really just briefly blown through a couple of maps that are particular types of maps. But you can go beyond just taking a map. Now, I won't get into the complexities of modeling data, but you can also do that as well. But again, for fun, what you can also do is you can take your information and you can create what's called a story map. Now, story map is what Esri calls, what their product is called. But the concept of a story map is found in a number of resources online, and they are not unique to Esri. But certainly Esri has put a lot of money into them. So you will find that they are becoming more and more sophisticated. They've actually gone through two distinct iterations. For the first few years, there were particular types of story maps, and it wasn't that you needed to know how to map or to use GIS software, but if you did, it was helpful because the mapping element, you could be a little bit more sophisticated. And then they shifted it over so that it's more emphasis on the graphical and the visual, and you can still, if you have mapping capacity, you can still use that. But now it's also very much along the lines of walking you through a nice website development, basically. So we've got Women in Parliaments, which is this little story map here. Now, I'm banking on this bringing up the browser and us being able to see it. Just a second, I will move it over. Oops, uh-oh. Okay, wrong way. There we go. I myself am not spatially inclined, which is somewhat hilarious, of course. So when you're getting help from me, there we go. Okay, so now what you'll see, this is pretty straightforward. Story Map is really, it's kind of a package for you to be able to take your data and display it, but also alongside with text and other audio-visual elements. So I won't really spend a lot of time, but what I will say is that a lot of people take the name Story Map and assume that that means it's very much just for mapping, but that is not the case at all. In fact, I've seen some story maps that would barely qualify as having a map or a cartographic element at all. So as you'll see, we've got the general information on the left hands going by, and then on the right hand side we've got different visualizations, and now we're going through, and this is much more narrative and graphical as we go through. Now I know I'm already running out of time, so I will not belabor the point. But the Story Map resource is really great, particularly if you are working with organizations outside the university and you want to be able to take some of that information. We have some projects on campus. Oh boy, I can't remember. I don't want to say in case I get the department wrong, but there's a department that's been working with the Northwest Fisheries group in the Bay of Fundy. And they've done some great. They've got the actual data from measurements that they've taken, waves and where the lobster traps and the various other measurement tools have been. They take the anecdotal information from the fishermen, and then they basically write up the commentary to match. And so we've really partnered with an outside group to come up with a project that master's students usually get assigned every year to work with this group. They kind of go back and forth between the content or the working with the outside organization, working with UNB as well, and more what's happening is Esri is really supporting this product to a degree that a lot of academic institutions are actually using story maps to produce academic and scholarly content. There are definitely things that you have to be aware of because in a traditional scholarly output, as you know, it's in an article or a book. It's really easy to make everything clear as to the sources of your information and what your process and your methods were. Something like a story map. It's a little bit more difficult, so you have to make sure that you're being really attentive to what anyone is going to need from you as the researcher to say, yeah, I can support this information that I'm making public.
The data, they are how many times they are updated? It is dynamic or not?
Well, a story map is dynamic to the point that anytime the researcher makes a change, it will be updated. But the data, the end result is always dependent on the researcher. So if you are using a product like story maps or even just a regular web map or even a static map, it's always a point in time, unless you have perhaps an API running which is constantly bringing in data.
So it will indicate that maybe the last data collected and the map, it has been done at that time, this year, this month, this week.
That is the responsibility of the researcher. So the StoryMap platform, for example, all it does is it provides you with the container, and it's up to you, the researcher, to make sure that you're making it clear to your audience what the situation is.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm sorry I have really gone over time, and now I will see if I can get this back. Get it out of the place. I was going to show you a couple of other slides, but I think we're at the end of time, and it really is just a couple of other examples. There are lots of great things that you can do with your geospatial or with your data, and we can work with geospatial data to try to bring that together. So once again, my name's Siobhan Hanratty, and I am absolutely happy to, I'd be pleased to meet with you and see what we can do to help you get started, okay? Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, and Josh Dickison, our copyright officer, is going to be speaking about copyright and the graduate student.
Great. And I'm just going to click this, and it's going to be like a normal slideshow to roll ahead and
I
back.
can always hope.
Okay, good. We're going to start with that. I guess nobody else here has, or Siobhan at least, doesn't have any kids at home, so I maybe went too far with the Halloween theme, but it's been quite a couple of days at my house. I think it's Halloween week is what it should be called. What I want to do is give everyone a bit of appreciation for what copyright means to you with your research, and maybe by introducing you to some of these topics, it'll save you some long emails with copyright owners and rights owners throughout your research, or the embarrassing part of having something pulled down and or retracted as a result of not getting the right rights or respecting the rights in the way that you could have or should have. It worked. Pardon. Copyright's everywhere. I've been doing this for 10 years or more, and it surprises me in every nook and cranny where something comes back and there's been a rights dispute or a license dispute or some complication with trying to pass information back and forth to researchers, to students, and how to teach with it and how to use it for your own intellectual consumption. So what I'm going to try to do here quickly is introduce you to copyright ownership, a user of copyrighted works, and then some important considerations with graduate research, trying to focus it down as much as possible. If any of you have received correspondence with me, you're going to hear me say it depends a lot. Copyright is a huge labyrinth of context. It affects everything from wrestling tattoos to teaching services at U of T, art, data, you name it. There's going to be some rights to that. That's what copyright is. Copyright is meant to be this theory behind how a society is going to recognize, how we're going to reward and incentivize creativity, but also recognizing that none of that creativity is going to come without sharing and building upon works that are already happening nationally and internationally. And so not only is there the complication of trying to balance all of those needs, there's also the bigger context of all of these rules that regulate what copyright law looks like are this bargaining chip with China and the EU and the United States, most importantly, in the next couple of months, and they get shuffled around in ways that us at UMB, we have to interpret and decide how we're going to use it, measuring risk. And so it's an international set of rules to balance incentives and creativity for the benefit of the public good. They're nationally focused, so you can work with somebody. Let's say you're a data researcher, and somebody from Japan has done some fantastic research. They've entered into a relationship with a private company. It's for profit, and your work with them, you've been told perhaps by ORS or by copyright or the rights holder that you can't do that in Canada. It's because the rules in Japan for data and consumption are different than the rules in Canada, and you have to apply the rules of your nation. That's what we have to follow. It applies to anything that you can express, literary, dramatic, musical, artistic works. It also protects sound recording and communication signals, which is another topic. What is not copyright? That's just as important. Facts, ideas, raw data are not copyrighted. There are patenting laws and trademark laws that may have implications, but the theory behind copyright is to ensure that we can still get our hands on unmediated data, facts, the telephone book. I think the simplest example is ingredients or a recipe book. The list of ingredients, not copyrighted. How you're going to put all those ingredients together, that's copyrighted work. There's a difference between plagiarism and copyright infringement. Plagiarism is stealing the ideas. That has much more to do with your discipline and your field academic integrity to take someone's ideas and not give credit. The copyright infringement is if not only you're taking your ideas, but you cut and pasted their work and presented it in its actual form. That's the copyright infringement. The copyright protection is on what's physically in print, how you've materialized it and recorded it, the impression. Public domain material only lasts in the copyright protection for so long. It's been life plus 50. Because of our Canadian, US, Mexico agreement, it's going to life plus 70 here in the next few months, I think. But also public domain incorporates things like Creative Commons and licensed goods. So public domain is broader than just materials that have left copyright protection. Terms of use and licensing. That's part of that. It's the gray area of copyright. It's the it depends again. You know, there are parts of certain material that someone's going to expressly say, use this, it's yours to use. They're not putting a Creative Commons license on it, but them as the copyright owner, and they have to be the owner, not just the author, but the owner, are giving you permission to use it. So the public domain is a very important part of what copyright is supposed to be in the broader context. So as an owner, the materials that you produce can be copyright protected, and you're the creator, so you're the first step in ownership for copyright. It needs to be original, also gray area. How are we going to decide which has the sweat of the brow or the intellectual effort put into it that it's going to get copyright protection? It has to be a recorded impression. This webinar, this talk here is being recorded on a microphone, so it has copyright protection. It's not mine, it's the university's, but it's recorded and protected. It's automatic. You don't have to put a C around it. You don't have to register it like a patent or an industrial design. It automatically gets copyright protection for life plus 50 coming to 70. That's the duration, the term that we're talking about that's going to change soon. It's transferable. The copyrights part of it is transferable. You can sell your ownership of that. The ownership is still going to be based on your life plus 50 or 70 years afterward, but you don't have any more control over the use of that copy. We're going to talk about moral rights as we go along, but it's the copyright that you're passing the ownership of to. Work for hire. That's why I don't own this recording. UNB owns it. A faculty member who produces something, that's not work for hire. That's work like a journalist has rights of first publication, and also with faculty member and other contracts out there, you have certain rights that are bundled into your collective agreement. Joint authorship, how to decide how you and international or local co-authors and co-researchers are going to share the rights. Moral rights, again, I have a slide specifically on this. It's quite important. But it's this control that you first get that you should think about when you're first starting your project. What's the end goal of where this paper is going to go, where this thesis is going to go, where the collection of this data should live and how I want it shared? What's the reward that I'm looking for as a graduate student, as a researcher in this field? ORS has all kinds of resources for commercialization, for ownership. That's the best place to go to when you want to find out more about how to control your rights as a user, as a creator. Users of rights. This is another sort of, without knowing what control is about, it's difficult to understand what a user's right is. User doesn't feel like the right term, but nobody's come up with a better one, a proliferator of rights, I'm not sure. But the key right in here is your fair dealing right. This is the balancing feature of everything in copyright is supposed to give to creativity, so that you can have an exception around those strong monopolistic rules of a copyright owner that gives you a chance to use bits and pieces of other people's works for creative purposes, for research, private study, teaching, criticism, review, news reporting, parody and satire if it applies. And it's very much a gray area. We've been given these black and whites by the Supreme Court of these purposes, but interpreting what those purposes are is still on the shoulders of the expert in the field and the Supreme Court judge. Your legal help is going to help you. I can help you as advice. Lawyers can help you. I can help you as information. Lawyers can help you as advice, but it's all going to be primarily based on you as the expert to decide what is the essential part of this work and how can I share it and should I share it. There are considerations about how you're sharing it. Is behind a password? Are you sharing it broadly? How much of it? Are there alternatives to that use? Could I have thought of something else to use rather than that specific piece? And what's the financial implications or the reward implications? Public domain, we talked about that, but those are some terms, some places to look for it. Creative Commons, GNU, there's lots of strong advocacy efforts out there to let you share your content in a way that's legal. It's a license that you're applying to that work. And then there's the problem of digital rights management. We've got these great exceptions and user rights in the Copyright Act in 2012 to try to catch up with our digital communication skills. But in top of all of those rights, a new right came in, which was a digital lock. And that not only takes away all of our rights, if there's a digital lock on something, you have no fair dealing, you have no educational exceptions, library, archive, museum exceptions, all those research exceptions are wiped away. And not only that, but they also strengthen the rights to penalize you if you have a way to break those locks. And I think the easiest way to understand it is a DVD. If you want to break into that video content and use a snippet out of it, just having the tools to break into that is an offense now. And it very much restricts a lot of creativity that we have. And it's opened a new avenue of publisher right control. All right, we're going to go straight to thesis and dissertation. I know 5 minutes is perfect. You're the sole owner. That's the part to begin with. You and the team of creators that you're working with. You start with that understanding, and the rest of it will come along much more easily. What you do in your discipline and professional citation standards is generally above and beyond what you need to do to satisfy anything from the copyright requirements. There's sourcing requirements in there, credit requirements in certain parts of it, but truthfully, APA has got that covered. Chicago, whoever you're using. Facts and ideas, understanding what that means, how to absorb and use, consume, and then redisplay that is important to how you're going to go forward with your research. The hard part about deciding what you can and cannot share is being the expert in that field. I'll have all kinds of information to share with you, but until yourself or your supervisor or what you know about your field, that's what's going to decide how you use your fair dealing rights. I don't know why every time I come into this position, the only example that comes to my mind is Arnold Schwarzenegger and Hasta La Vista. But if I was a film producer or a teacher and I wanted to use a piece out of Arnold Schwarzenegger's repertoire of films, and I used 10 minutes out of Total Recall, I think the film is, that could be fair use. I've used only 10 minutes out of this document. But if I use Hasta La Vista, the heart of it, the money maker, the thrust of what that's worth, that's the problem. And that's nothing as a copyright expert I would be able to help you with, but you as the professional, you're the one who knows where and when you need to give full credit for materials and when you can use it. If you do need to ask for permissions, it can take up to 6 weeks. Think about how you want your work to be used downstream. Should it be open access? Should it not be? Again, consult with your supervisor. And if you do, from your expert opinion, think this is has commercial value or will have value beyond your research and graduate studies, by all means, get in touch with ORS. Work for hire. Lots of you have TA or instruction relationships. Here are the words around your relationship with the content you teach with. You should generally be the owner of all of that content. I see there are words in there about sharing it with the university. That's something to think about. But as you progress through your career, make sure you look at those agreements that you've made for work for hire and understand what your rights are for publication and where your productivity should be rewarded or not rewarded, and what you get to keep afterward. I guess Mark has enabled my, locked me out. I'll end it here, but I think it's important to look at copyright going forward. In the next few months, the Canadian government is going to make big changes to the Copyright Act, and it's going to have implications for text and data mining. It's going to have implications for rights to repair, and it's also going to have implications for artificial intelligence and how we're going to be able to use other people's research, consume it, spit it out. Who's going to be the owner of a piece of music that has pulled in those tiny little insignificant pieces that weren't copyrighted protected but have produced something new? Who's the owner to that? So the federal government is embarking on this. It's hard to say how intensely they're going to ask for people's opinion, but give it to them anyway. They're planning on town halls, so by all means get in touch with me if you're looking for dates or ways to engage, but please reach out with any of your questions.
Imagine you are a forestry graduate student working with a private sector company doing some participatory research around sustainable forestry management practices, where creating strong networks and having a good knowledge mobilization plan is at a premium in what you're doing. Or maybe you're an MBA student who's looking at organizational change and wants to do a little bit of active action research in your own particular milieu. Maybe you're a PhD student in education, interested in innovative pedagogies for second language acquisition. You could be teaching an undergraduate class and interested in challenging your students to extend the learning that they're doing and develop new skills that might put them in a better position to be hired later on. And maybe you're just wanting to look at all the theory that you're learning, reflect upon it in terms of your lived experience, get together with a friend over a bottle of wine or a bottle of grape juice, and change the world one gleeful rant at a time. What do all of these things have in common? They are great ideas that found their ideal vehicle in academic podcasting. It is low cost, efficient. It is the Toyota Corolla of knowledge mobilization. And if this sounds like an infomercial, it very much is for some of the things that the Research Commons can do for you. I have a couple of different roles in the context of this talk anyways. I'm the digital pedagogy librarian, and what that means is I help instructors, students come up with different assignment and project ideas beyond just the text modality, not to eliminate words or anything like that, but to extend their power so that in the case of podcasting, that the word can be heard. And as the head of the Harriet Irving Library Research Commons, which is hosting the Booster Series, what we try to do is, through programming, through our expertise, services, and resources and spaces that we provide, strengthen our research community, and in terms of knowledge mobilization initiatives, extend our community outward as the relevance of the research that you're conducting is made known beyond these walls. So in my own career here, in terms of knowledge mobilization, I've been fairly active over the years in video production for instruction and also for promotion. And then in my own personal life, I've done a lot of stuff in the audio realm around performance and recording. And in both cases, my credo has been leverage the little that you know, grow as you go, and keep the overhead low. And that's pretty much what we've been doing at the Research Commons. with knowledge mobilization. For those of you who haven't been here or haven't been around the floor, just to show you a couple of things, we have a video studio called the Lightboard Studio, which has what you might consider a souped-up whiteboard, enabling you to annotate images, run meetings, record video. And we also lend out some video equipment for self-filming, like tripods and handheld gears, microphones, lenses and lights specific to the technology that people can go out and use, even teleprompters. We also have an audio studio that has decent studio quality mics, beginner and more advanced software in a purpose-built environment. We've also been with one of our students, an electrical engineer, undergrad named Cola, developing our own podcast since last year so that we just understand the nuts and bolts and logistics of running something like this. And it's called UNB in 30, where Cola's interviewing students on their particular context and where it fits in with UNB's strategic plan toward 2030, having to do with transformational learning, community engagement, and research impact. So before we get too far ahead of ourselves, what is academic podcasting? Let's start with what isn't academic podcasting. This is my own opinion, take it for what it's worth, but I don't think that podcasting is audio from recorded live lectures intended for a captive audience. So we just use the audio from this particular talk and upload it. I would contend it's not a podcast, especially if all we did was hit record, do something, hit stop, and upload it. Not that there isn't what calls itself podcasting, even at UNB, happening in that way. But if you're going to be developing an audio project, to me the important thing is that you understand the medium and you develop the project intentionally to leverage that medium and to leverage the experience. It's a very different dynamic and it's a very different energy when you're in a room with other people or virtually in real time. There's a lot that can be forgiven, I think, versus appearing in somebody's headphones or earbuds on their own time. The dynamic is going to be entirely different, and you have to plan for that. Even when we upload these video recordings, I'm going through and cutting a lot of stuff out that just wouldn't be of interest to somebody listening later on, and I also record separate audio to mix in because the team's audio is so tinny. You could forgive it when you're actually here tuning in, we're used to it, but not so much if you were going to actually choose to listen to this yourself, your own time, in your earbuds. So what is academic podcasting? It's really any kind of podcasting, but I really like this set of quotes from Corinne Jolie in University Business. Podcasting finds its strength in what could be seen as a weakness in a world relying so much on visual stimuli. What's also seen as a strength can be a weakness, and that is that all the video that we're consuming, it's more and more the way that we find information, figure out how to do things, communicate messages. It pretty much hijacks your imagination and your body. It's immersive, it's ubiquitous, it is all-consuming. And there's so many messages vying for your time, and you have so little time that what's been happening is you certainly experience that those messages, that content becomes briefer and more superficial. Maybe that's an overgeneralization, but I think it is a fair averaging of what's going on. With podcasting, however, one of the reasons it's compelling, and I think one of the reasons that it's really risen in popularity is because it asks the listener to be an active participant in the story. Your hands are free, your eyes are free, you're making the images yourself, you could be walking around in the world, doing the dishes, whatever the case may be, and yet paradoxically it seems to be happening deep inside of you. And there's different sort of communion there and an availability of yourself to be open to deeper and more prolonged investigations. And interestingly to me too, is that if you're a creator of a podcast and you're inviting people in, whether as subjects or co-investigators, they're very much more active participants in your research as well, because their voice is there. You catch the nuance, you catch the tone. It's a very different sort of dynamic. So that's the sound, potentially, of knowledge mobilization. And interestingly to me, increasingly, knowledge mobilization from a funding standpoint has gone from being a nice to have to you should really have it. In fact, we were contacted at the Research Commons this week by a UNB faculty member interested in seeing how we could contribute in kind to podcasting component of a SHIRT grant. So before it was just you need an open access piece, now you really need to be thinking about a well-planned knowledge mobilization activity, and podcasting is certainly one possibility. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to skip over some manifestations at UNB, but there is, you might have, I guess I won't skip over it. There's Unbeknownst, the podcast for alumni. It's a university PR marketing, knowledge mobilization brand builder. I think of the UNB Law podcast that Dean Michael Marin's been putting out. The ISAO podcast, International Student Advisors Office, builders of communities, and I have had students myself reach out to me who wanted to use podcasting as a means to conduct as well as share research. So you think, okay, that's all well and good. Maybe you tell yourself, I've got a face for radio, but I'm not a performer. It's just not something that I'm interested in, and I never liked the sound of my own voice when I've heard it recorded, and besides, when would I ever have time to do any of this? Well, going back to UNB's Toward 2030 objectives, bold ideas changing the world, I guess you have to ask yourself whether your research has a potential effect on the everyday world now and moving forward, and I certainly hope that would be the case for everybody listening in. And do you really sound that bad? An interesting thing to me is that you hear me in the room in an environment with air and reverberation. You hear me online in Teams with the particular aspects of that. When you hear your voice in a recording, you generally hear it stripped of all the ambience in a room, and you don't actually sound that way anyways. So what you need to do, and what people like me can help you with, is putting the ambience and reverb and the warmth back into the recording. So there are techniques just to counter an oft-heard objection to this. And the point of that is that you don't have to go it alone. Whether with CETL or the Research Commons or even CHSR or, and I wrote this down, CFMH at UNBSJ, there are people that can help you with this. We can help with plotting a narrative through your research, and that's actually very parallel to what I've done as a reference librarian for many years in helping graduate students figure out how to ask the right questions in order to find the literature that they're searching for. It really has to do with how do you connect with your research personally, and what are the stories in your own life that are informing your interests and the way that you go about making decisions. Naming and format, we can help with that. The right equipment, whether using the audio studio or you're going to do some field recordings, we can send you out with a decent microphone for your Samsung or for your iPhone and give you some tips. Or if you're going to do an interview over the phone with somebody, we can advise on how to get the best audio from that person rather than just recording it through your phone and that sort of thing. We can help with recording. We can help with the editing and post-processing, which is absolutely vital, just as vital as the planning process at the beginning. We can help with sound design and adding in soundtrack elements, normalizing voices. We can advise on hosting and publishing. We can help you with growing and making it successful. And I'm right at the end. So I guess the thing that I wanted to say was that having these sort of skills is important in terms of making your research relevant to a broader world, but I also think that moving forward with your careers, wherever it takes you, given the competitiveness of the world today, having some skills in communication and technology, as well as demonstrating a deep concern and a deep engagement with your stakeholders, is going to give you a leg up when you are looking for work. So my contact information is carried here. As I mentioned, the recording for this on YouTube will have a number of links that you can mine, whether you want to look at some things for yourself or contact myself or Siobhan or Josh directly. That will be available.